LiSTNR production.
A warning. This episode contains graphic descriptions of sexual assault and violence against women. If this content does affect you, the number for Lifeline is 13 11 14. If you're concerned for your own or someone else's safety, call 1-800-RESPECT. If you're in Australia and it's an emergency, dial 000. Please listen with care. G'day, I'm former police officer Brent Sanders, and for the past 25 years I've dedicated myself to sharing what I've learnt on the force to the Australian public so they can better protect themselves from falling victim to crime. So with the help of some of the most respected current and former detectives and high-ranking law enforcement agents, we're going to pull back the curtain on what life is like on the force and what they've learned about how crime and criminals really work. These are real stories from real detectives. This week, the moment police raided the house of the Claremont Serial Killer.
So I bashed through the front door and then grabbed him at gunpoint in the hallway.
Todd Bowler is a 23-year veteran of the Western Australian Police. From general duties to the tactical response group, Todd has worked in some of WA's most intense operations. We'll dive into a couple of those cases. One, a $1 million offshore drug interception, and the other, a gunpoint armed robbery at a Perth jewellery store.
I didn't actually hear any of the rounds, and I actually had to go back and count the shells to know how many times I'd fired, because I'd just fired until the threat wasn't there anymore.
Before that, we're going back to Todd's time in general duties and how he worked the beat during the height of the Claremont serial killings.
It was an interesting one starting into that environment where there was a feeling of fear in Perth. Every resource that the police had were on it, and there was still this mystery and things happening. So when I started, I was definitely involved in a few different ways. General duties wise, so I used to drive the marked van around the areas of Northbridge and Claremont, Northbridge is our nightclubby area, and Claremont with the pubs and clubs there where the girls had been before they went missing, unfortunately. So we would often be tasked with driving around Claremont, looking at cars. Even though 2 girls had been mysteriously disappeared off the streets, there were still girls that would walk home at 2 a.m, 3 a.m. in the morning alone and start wandering through back streets. So we would take the time to follow them, make sure they got home, or if necessary, give them a lift somewhere if they were going a bit further. So dealing with the fear factor, and it was quite interesting for me to see the amount of security, the CCTV cameras that have been set up around Claremont. So it's only a small patch with a couple of loop roads to go around the pubs and nightclubs and things. Easy to patrol and easy to keep an eye on things. I had a few guys at watching the CCTV cameras and keeping an eye on things from there. You could see cars coming and going. You could watch girls and groups walking home and keep an eye on everything, which is why it was even more baffling when, with all that going on and all the police cars driving around, when the third girl went missing from the Claremont area, which just obviously escalated the fear because this guy, it was thought at the time, and we thought at the time, that this guy was a genius. You know, he got some inside knowledge, or he'd done something special. I don't believe that was the case at the end of the day. I think he was very lucky with getting away with it. But despite everything that we had in place, the third girl went missing. And following that, there was obviously still providing security around the area and assisting Major Crime, who had the investigation for the entire 23 or so years that it went, assisting with different door knocks and things. So they'd have teams of detectives, and as you expect, they've been, interviewing every taxi driver, uncovering every stone that they could, following certain suspects that they had in mind. But as general duties, we did a few door knocks, and we would just check on people's details and where they lived and get their car registrations and things. So that would all go into this massive database of investigation that the detectives had going. Early on that was my involvement, and just in the door knocks and things. It was a very interesting case because it went right through my entire policing career. And I also had other involvement, particularly when I was at TRG in a couple of other areas where we were providing security while surveillance was happening and things like that in case something went wrong. So that was most of my early involvement.
So 2 young women had been abducted, and then as you're working, there's a third. After that third young woman was abducted, how many more cases were attributed to this same individual?
At the end of the day, there was cases attributed to him before the girls went missing, and a mystery as to, for me, I would love to find out what happened in the years following that. There's detectives have worked hard on piecing together what happened from there, whether he's just satisfied his urges and gone into civilization, but not a normal person by any stretch of the imagination. But the cases beforehand were just very, from my experience, they're very typical of sex offender type crimes where he's done certain things like burglaries and then leading to murder. So it's all escalated, and the amount of times I believe we stopped a lot of those sex offenders in my time where you'd get someone who was just ramping up and he'd about to do a burglary with a whole bunch of tape and a knife in his bag and things like that. So the same sort of patterns seem to emerge with that, I guess, the sex offender urges that they get. So his crimes had started small and just grown bigger and bigger, but they definitely pieced together the crime and put together DNA and things like that as related to some of the smaller crimes that he'd done, and then linked it to the murders later on. So yeah, he escalated and then stopped from the looks of it.
Todd, we will be circling back around to look at the conclusion of the Claremont Serial Killers case and your involvement in it. But if I could take you from those early days as a general duties copper through to around 2015, you're involved in an investigation into $1 billion or dollars worth of methamphetamine being delivered onto a jetty in Western Australia. Can you walk us through this and your involvement in it?
It made my small 1 grams, 2 grams of meth busts in Northbridge pale in comparison a little bit. Makes you realise that you're just plugging holes in the damn wall when that sort of large amounts come through. But 3 guys went out and they bought a boat basically off a guy that was selling it. Told the guy that yep, they'll take it, and then brought out a bag full of cash for 300 grand and gave him the cash. And he thought, okay, interesting, but sold the boat. And then they asked him, 1, if he could teach them how to drive the boat, and 2, if he could teach them how to drive the boat to this area a long way off Geraldton out in the open ocean. So he's now selling a boat for cash to 3 guys who can't drive a boat and want to know how to get to a particular point out in close to Asian waters. So good on him. He took the cash, sold the boat, and rang the federal police at the same time, and the investigation for this one started from there. So there was different things happened along the way. So at TRG, we get the intelligence updates because we're getting ready to do the final takeout, and that could be tomorrow, that could be next week, depending on what's happening. So we really need all the situational awareness we can get so we can make decisions when it happens. So if they want to throw it to us straight away, we already know what's happening. We can plan quickly and take them out. But there was different surveillance areas watching these guys, different ways of recording what they were talking about and things like that. So it turns out they were going to drive the boat off Geraldton out into the open ocean, international waters, and meet a mothership out there, grab a whole lot of drugs. So it was 1.2 tonnes of methamphetamine, and then drive it back to Geraldton. So we had all that intel coming in, and we knew when it was happening. So we headed up to Geraldton, got the teams ready, did our planning, which involved, we had land teams for that one. So we had teams in vehicles ready to take out anything on land. We had our TRG rigid hull inflatable boats, so the boats that we used just to take out anything on water, and we had snipers set around in different positions. We also had AFP and had things set up like CCTV cameras on port area where the boat was likely to come in and things like that, and we had aerial surveillance going and keeping an eye on the boat. So we headed up to Geraldton, got the teams ready, all had a briefing on the plan and the mission, which was to seize these drugs, so not let them get through. And as we found out it was getting closer and closer, we found out they were out in the ocean. So they'd done about believe it was around a 20-hour transit out into the ocean and then back again. So we had the team set up. We moved from our hotel up there to the vehicles. I was in one of the vehicle teams. My job was to basically, I was a breacher, so breaching doors, windows, but also involved shooting out tyres of cars and things with special ammunition and all that. So my job was to shoot the tyres out of the car if it was rolling and stop that getting away so that the drugs would be easy to seize and then move on to arrest whoever we had to arrest. Things don't usually go to plan, of course, but that was my initial role. So we had the vehicles set up out in the streets of Geraldton, so away from the port a little bit. We had iPads with footage of the port so we could see what was going on, and we had our snipers in the actual port, in the bushes and things, just keeping an eye on everything, giving us surveillance and communications of what they could see, which we always used our own guys on the ground because they knew what we needed to know. We worked with our guys, we worked with the Federal Police telling us what was happening with the boat out at sea. We sat around the corner, around the dark streets for probably 3 hours while this boat was coming back in towards Geraldton, and sure enough, we eventually see it come into the port. So we see it on the cameras coming into the port. Everything fit the bill because they started bouncing off pylons and trying to park this boat, so they were smashing into the jetty a few times and everything. So, yep, pretty sure this is our guys. Plus, it was 3 a.m. by then, so they still hadn't learned how to park the boat. They were horribly seasick. They'd just been out, where they shouldn't have been. They'd been going for 20 hours without sleep, and they were crashing into the pylons and things, trying to get the ropes over the jetty. So we sat back pretty comfortably, letting them bash around a bit. They eventually got that boat settled in the jetty. One of the guys, we watched him go grab a big white van. He drove it up the jetty where cars don't normally go, but he drove it up the jetty. We gave them a bit of time to load their 20-kilo bags of methamphetamine into the back of the van, which took probably about 20 minutes. So by now they were seasick and sweating and just in a bad way. Two of them jumped in the van, one of them stayed on the boat, and then we gave our code word to close in. So the TRG boats closed in from the dark areas of the ocean behind the port. In the vehicles, we closed in towards where the van was, and as the van was reversing off the jetty, we basically blocked them in so they didn't even get to the car park. I've come round, shot one of the tyres out, which actually blew out pretty heavily because of the 1.2 tonnes in the van, so blew the goggles off my helmet, which is fun. Stopped the car there, and then we grabbed the guys out of the driver's and passenger seat of the car, and as you expect, overwhelmed, seasick and freaking out a little, and had them on the ground. And there was another guy who, remember, he'd kind of seen it happening. He started walking off the jetty and off into the shadows, and he's kind of pretended to be not involved and just a passerby. But unfortunately for him, it's 3 a.m. There's no one else in the port, and he's one of the guys. So he's on the ground in the car park. And then once we had the two guys in the van secure, we went to the boat, cleared that, made sure there's no one else on there, and guys on the TRG boats had jumped on as well. Basically secured everyone, made sure the drugs were all there, and waited for detectives to turn up to talk to everyone and seize everything that we had there. So long story short, it was a big takeout. It was, over $1 billion worth of street value of methamphetamine and didn't get off the jetty. So it was highly successful at the end of the day.
That's an incredible case, isn't it? And on the one hand, we're talking about, as you say, Todd, the biggest drug bust in Australian history. I mean, that's unbelievable and huge, over a tonne's worth of methamphetamine. And yet there's almost a Keystone Cops sort of a process going on with the blokes that are, buying their first boat for $300,000, not quite sure how to operate it, bouncing off pylons, coming in, crook as dogs because none of them have been at sea before. There's an almost comical side to what is an extremely serious operation. And you've got AFP there. I'm sure there's some WA State Police in the outer circle as well. Then you've got the TRG guys like yourself right in the inner sanctum. How many on that unit, on that TRG unit? You've got some at sea. You've got some on the jetty. There are quite a few blokes involved.
Probably 12 to 14 in the ribs. We would have had carloads of another 12 in the cars, and then another 4 snipers positioned in different places, plus our command and administration from TRG. So probably well over 30. Federal Police would have had a cast of 1,000, but probably 10 there. And then detectives from WA was huge as well. So probably 20 to 25 detectives from WA ready to deal with all the evidence, and including forensic teams and things like that. So a huge amount of follow-up work for them. And unusually for this one, we stayed with the drugs and escorted them back to Perth and things. So normally when we do a job, everyone's on the ground, cable tied, and everyone's secure. We hand it over to detectives, but because of the crazy amount of drugs and the street value and things like that, we gave it an armed escort back the next day and basically stuck with the drugs the whole time until they were securely locked away. So, yeah, a huge amount of resources, including the 3 months leading up to it, and the surveillance teams and things like that were ready to follow anyone that might have disappeared.
Massive. And from the initial tip-off, and let's tip our hat to that gentleman, the bloke that sold his boat for $300,000 to the blokes who paid cash and had no idea how to drive a boat. And from that phone call, it's about a 3-month operation before you're there at the jetty on that night.
Yeah, that's about right. It's trying to work out exactly what their plan is and where they're going to do it and when they're going to do it. We're building up to basically execute the plan before, months before they're ready to go. And then we finally find out that, yep, they're going to head out on this day. That's just the end of the full 3 months of planning, build up and equipment preparation and things like that, yeah.
Now, the 3 guys, 2 that were in the van, 1 who was wandering around in the shadows, they're locked up, charged. They'd have received fairly substantial custodial sentences, I'd imagine. That's a massive importation of drugs.
Yeah, I believe they won't be out. I think the shortest one who can possibly get out, if he gets out as early as he can, will be around 19 years, and the rest, over 20 years. And small fish in the scheme of things, but some of the bigger players were taken out later by detectives and things, and some raids around Perth and I believe international as well. So they probably got some more severe penalties, but follow-ups from the takeout, there's lots of evidence and investigations that come through afterwards.
In 2005, you're a member of the TRG Tactical Response Group, and you're involved in the apprehension of an armed robber outside the lobby of a Perth hotel. Can you just walk us through that case?
This is one of the more high-risk cases, and armed robberies used to be a big thing. They're not such a big thing anymore. I don't think there's, there used to be a lot of cash around and things like that, so armed robberies were pretty huge in Perth at the time. This guy was worse than the average armed robber, whereby he was always on drugs. He was on meth at the time. He always had a gun with him, so a pistol, and he escalated each time he did a robbery. So he'd done about 12 armed robberies before we got to him, but each robbery, so he'd start off waving his pistol around and threatening and getting money, and then he started about 4 or 5 robberies in, he started firing off rounds into the roof of wherever he was, just to add a bit more threatening behaviour to the scenario and get maybe more cash or however he was thinking. And it just kept getting more and more aggravated every robbery. So he's like getting more confident, ramping it up. So the urgency to grab this guy was getting pretty high, and we didn't have a lot to go on other than we got a tip off one day that he might be at this hotel in East Perth. Mission for us was to safely arrest this guy, which was not as easy as it sounds, given that he always carried a gun and he was erratic and on drugs and things like that. So the plan basically came down to, I was driving one of our vans, so I had a bunch of tactical operators in the back of the van ready to jump out. I was driving the van, and we'd parked in the back car park of the East Perth Hotel, where we believed his car might have been in the car park. We had 2 other cars with TRG guys in them, ready to drive up so they could block in any exit points. We had snipers all around the hotel at elevated points so they could see down into the car parks and things and give us commentary from all different directions. Surveillance teams and different people ready to follow any cars, chase any cars that might have escaped if that went wrong. And we had a couple of guys in plain clothes in the lobby of the hotel, so keeping an eye out if he came or went, so we'd have a early warning sign if anything happened. So we sat out in the car park for probably a few hours waiting for things to happen, and sure enough, eventually he comes down into the lobby of the hotel to the reception, did whatever he did there, and our guys had reported it, that they'd seen him and that he was coming out of the lobby. So as it was, he walked out of the lobby and he walked towards the back car park. Being a young tactical operator and keen as I was, I started the van getting ready to do my thing, which was to block the car park so he couldn't get out of it. And then the guys would jump out of the back of the van. Just so happened that I started the van up as he was walking past or very close to it. So he heard the engine start up on this stereotypical van. And being an edgy, paranoid criminal that he was, he started stepping it up rather than just walking to his car. So he's jogged to what we thought was his car, and it was probably 10 cars away in a car bay. And seeing that he'd sped it up, I started rolling out of where we were towards the exit of the car park to block the exit. He's started the engine up straight away, but I've blocked him in. So he's directly behind the white van in the car park. I thought I had the car park pretty well blocked, and I gave the guys in the back of the van the go-ahead to jump out and arrest him. So I watched in the rear view, in the side mirrors, as the guys basically surrounded his car. They had machine guns pointed at through his windscreen and things like that. And what I could see through the windows was he had his hands up, he'd surrender position, and his car had stopped and he just had guns pointed at him. So, like I say, young and keen at the time, I've jumped out of the van to get involved in the action where the action was right behind me. I even took the keys out of the van so that nothing would go wrong. And just as my foot hit the ground, he's revved his car and floored it through the crowd of operators. So he's kind of cleverly avoided hitting any of them. So I think if he's going straight for them, he probably would have been shot there and then. He's kind of floored it around them, and I'm standing there with the keys in my hand, knowing that I haven't fully blocked the car park and I haven't even got time to get back in the van to move it forwards to just block that exit a little bit. But one of those huge lessons learned from me that I never got wrong again. He came around the van. He missed the van, but he bounced off a couple of cars in the car park with his, flooring in. There's a bit of a dirt patch area. So he's bounced off a wall and a pylon attached to the hotel as he scraped out of the car park. And then he bounced off another car and he's revving it up in a dirt patch again. So he's spinning the wheels and he's basically ramming this car, and he's fully bogged, but he's doing whatever he can to get away. So real erratic and just doing whatever he had to do. Same time, our two cars did the right thing, drove up the driveway to block each driveway so he couldn't get out that way, and took him out where he'd been bogged and he was spinning the wheels, which he'd locked the doors and everything, so it involved we had to smash the windows. He got tasered in the car because he's still trying to floor it and get away, and he actually had loaded pistol in the door of the car, and he had another gun in the glove box at the time, so anything could have happened. But yeah, he got windows smashed, tasered, dragged out of the car, and then we'll call it safely arrested at that point.
He would have got a fairly substantial custodial sentence for, possession of the firearms and all that previous, I think, a dozen or so robberies. But he was out 3 months later. Now, what were the circumstances around that, Todd?
The big criticism from the media was that he'd been let out on parole, so the parole board had let him out. Not necessarily their fault. He kind of, and I met the detective, who is a very good detective, but he had convinced this detective that he was going to take him to the Mr. Biggs of the world, as criminals tend to do. They roll on each other to get out of trouble. And so the detective did what he could, got him out on parole, and waiting to catch those Mr. Biggs of the drug world and things. But as soon as he got out of prison after that 3 months to go and do this informant work for the detective, he disappeared again and went off on a rampage. So didn't all go to plan, that one, but he got straight back on the drugs again, and he spent the next few weeks running around. He changed his tact a little bit, so he wasn't doing armed robberies as much. He was basically doing burglaries on his drug dealing mates, torturing them and trying to get into safes and things. So one of his so-called mates that he grabbed in his house, he had him down on the ground. He used a machete to hack his Achilles heel open, and then he fired a round off next to his ear, and then he clicked the pistol on his head, kind of thing. So he's trying to get into this guy's safe, and I don't believe the guy knew how to get into the safe, so he had no chance. But yeah, a lot of pain, suffering, and torture, and he was doing this to his so-called mates, like I said, just to try and get all the money he could, and just run around and getting on the drugs, and doing what he could, because I believe he knew he would have got caught eventually, but he wasn't stopping. So eventually some of his mates gave a tip off to the police that he'd well, the only information we had was that he'd looked at this jewellery store in South Perth, and they basically gave the information because they were in fear of their lives and they didn't know what he was going to do next to them. So that wasn't a lot to go on, as you'd imagine, but we got the information over the weekend, so we had to look at how do we keep this jewellery store open, not knowing if it will happen, when it will happen, but we've also got we've got to protect the jewellery store owner if anything does happen, so we've got a duty of care to him. And so we came up with a plan over the weekend that we'd have TRG guys in the back room of this jewellery store waiting just in case. And there was a small back area where the jeweller made his jewellery and designed everything. And then there was a display area just in front of that. And so it was only a small shop, and there was a front door leading to the display area and then a door at the back leading into the jewellery store design area. So we had guys in the back room, and there was a safe back there as well, so not sure whether he knew that or not. I'm sure he probably had some idea that he was going to get into that. 3 guys in the back room. We had guys in different cars, so 4 different cars full of tactical operators around the South Perth jewellery store, and they were off at a distance initially because, so not to spook him if he did turn up, we wanted to be able to grab him and not let him go away and do other things. We had snipers positioned in different buildings around the jewellery store, so they were at high points where they could see down into it, and they're in different businesses where they'd talk their way into the businesses and would spend the day or days or however long it took keeping an eye on things, and we knew what was going on inside the jewellery store. And we also had surveillance and detectives and people ready to take out anyone who tried to get away. So a fair setup again, a cast of thousands, but it was quite a busy street that this jewellery store was on, so we really didn't want anything to go wrong as far as bashing and crashing and things like the first takeout that we did at East Perth. We went in there on the Monday. I was in the back room with 2 of the other guys. One of our guys was in plain clothes, so his job was to go out. If someone walked into the store, he'd go out into the display area, work out whether they were a real customer or a bad guy, and then he'd go back and get the jewellery store owner who was in the back room with us, and he could serve him so business could carry on. And then about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, we had reports that our snipers were calling this car, small green Hyundai, was doing laps of the jewellery store. So there was an alleyway down the side and down the back of the jewellery store. So they did a couple of circles of the jewellery store, and they pulled up in the alleyway. One of the guys got out, and again, we're in this back room, we can't see, but everything's coming through on our radio from the snipers. Then he goes in the front door, and our guy in plain clothes, Mitch, he goes out to see him, and they had probably the most awkward conversation you'll ever have in a jewellery store, because neither of them knew anything about jewellery, but it was something along the lines of a bad guy saying, "Oh, is this real gold?" pointing to a necklace, and Mitch said, "Yep." And then 5 seconds of pause, and the guy walked out. Not a real customer, as we worked out very quickly. We also worked out we probably need to learn a bit more about jewellery ourselves, so all good. So yeah, he walked out, and then we got reports that he'd gone back to the car briefly, but then he came back. He started walking back pretty quickly towards the front door. So we're inside the store. So I've got police vest and tactical response group gear on, M4 rifle ready to go, and one of the guys behind me is the same. He's looking after the shop owner. Mitch was ready to go as well next to me. So I'm pretty much crouched down near an open doorway which leads out into the display area from our back room. Mitch can see through a glass panel the front door, so he can give me the call when I need to go. So we want to make sure anyone who's coming in is inside the jewellery store before I get up and run out there and try and safely arrest them. While he's walking towards the front door, we hear this big bang on one of the windows, and then the snipers are calling. He's run back to the car. The car's floored it down the road, heading off about 100 metres in one direction, and they've been taken out by one of our cars at gunpoint and things, and they're on the ground. And so we've sat there. There's no point us getting out of the back room because no one's come into the store. Turns out that these guys, completely unrelated to our armed robber that we're looking for, had decided that they were going to try and throw ball bearings at the window out the front, try and snatch a couple of necklaces and things, and then drive off as quick as they could. So they got taken out by TRG in the quickest possible arrest they've ever seen, not knowing probably what went wrong. But while they're on the ground, we get reports that our actual bad guy, they've detected his phone getting closer and closer to South Perth. So he'd headed to South Perth from the south of WA basically. So he's on the freeway heading our way. These guys, TRG guys that had the other two bad guys, quickly shuffled them into a van and got them out of sight, and then reset into positions where they wouldn't be noticed. And we got set to go again. So we reset in the back of the shop. Again, I'm crouched down next to the open doorway, listening to what the snipers and everyone are telling us. Mitch is right next to me again, and our other guy Stevie's looking after the shopkeeper. We had reports that this car was driving down the road that the jewelry store was on. The car pulled up in the alleyway behind the jewelry store. One of our snipers is looking straight into it, so he's reporting everything. He said the driver and the passenger swapped, and the now passenger is putting a balaclava on. So we're like, okay, just got more serious again. And then he's called the car's moving, and the car moved pretty quick from out of the alleyway right up to the front door, basically up the footpath up to the front door, so about a couple of metres from the front door. Passenger just jumped out with his balaclava. Mitch, looking through the window again, like I say, he gave me the go-ahead, but only once we were trying to get this bad guy into the jewelry store so he wouldn't get back in the car and cause chaos in peak hour traffic. By the time he gave me the go, I started coming up from my kneeling position, and I'm calling police, don't move, and coming up into the open doorway with my rifle raised, and I basically see a big pistol pointed at me, so a big muzzle, and just a black silhouette behind it. So I'm focused on the actual threat, the muzzle pointed at my head at that point. My assault rifle and his pistol, so I've fired a couple of times until that muzzle was no longer pointing at my face, basically, and it was pointed off to the side a bit. I had in my mind that he might come into the store at a steady rate and we'd be able to grab him out the front, but he'd come running towards the back door, pistol out, and so it came down to rifle versus pistol in the doorway. But I've fired a couple of times until he started to turn and his muzzles moved away from me, and then I stopped firing because I'm not about to get shot at that point. So Mitch has also fired. He fired through the glass panel at this guy because he could see the shootout in the doorway. He thought I was going down with the shootout, but yeah, basically shot this guy a few times. The guy, a bit of shock and overwhelm, no doubt, but he's run back towards the front door that he came in through and basically bounced off the door with his face because he's been shot once straight through the sternum, kind of lodged in the spine. Second round's gone straight through his arm, blown his bicep out and through his ribs into one of the display cabinets of the jewelry store, but his arm wasn't working that he'd normally open the door with, so his face planted into the door and hit the ground. I've chased him up, quite angry at that point that anyone would dare point a pistol at me. That's just what I was thinking at the time, and saw that his pistol was beside him on the ground, so he wasn't holding anymore, and I had a look at him and he's going blue and he's kind of looks like he's having trouble breathing, so I thought, okay, this guy's potentially going to die now. So Mitch and Stevie have run past me to try and grab the car that was out the front, right outside the front door, but that guy's done a burnout, taken off, and got taken out down the road by our vehicle team, so that was all good. But jumped on the bad guy, and as soon as it went from the life-threatening situation to he's going to die, we all went straight into action and got our first aid kit ready to go, which we always have prepared. Got oxygen into him through an Oxyviva. He got his colour back. He got breathing again. And ambulance guys eventually turned up and took him off to hospital and saved him from there. So he got prison time, but he survived that one.
You tell the story in a very laconic way, and it's a hell of a story. And could I ask, is that the closest you've come during your time in the TRG to being shot?
Yeah, that was, 2 metres, yeah, it was, there's been guns and shootings and people shooting themselves even and things like that, but what we teach and learn in theory is that the sensors adapt. So when I talk about the muzzle of the pistol, in my eyes, was quite large because I was really intensely focused on the muzzle and trying not to get shot. When I say the background was blurry and black, and I wasn't really focusing on him. He was wearing a black jumper, but I couldn't tell you who he was if I didn't look at him later. If you fire around in the firing range or in training and you don't have earplugs or some ear protection on, guys have got really damaged ears from rounds going off right near their eardrums and things. But I had Mitch firing right next to my ears. I was firing I didn't actually hear any of the rounds, and I actually had to go back and count the shells to know how many times I'd fired, because I'd just fired until the threat wasn't there anymore. So all these audible preclusion and different things happening with the eyes and focusing and things, tunnel vision sort of thing, it all does happen. I think it's just the body's way of survival. While I talk it down, it was quite a few years ago. There was a lot of adrenaline following the incident as well for me. So a couple of nights where I would just, what could I have done differently? And I wouldn't have done a thing differently. It was me or him, and it was shooting until the threat went away. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with the scenario, but just the adrenaline and the thought process and how it works. It's amazing how the brain works in these things. But I got a chance to help other tactical operators through different shootouts and things over the years based on what I'd been through, and some senior guys told me, they gave me good advice on the night to work through things as well as the black humour, the 5 a.m. debriefs after the internal investigations are all finished, and a few laughs.
Mm. It's interesting, Todd, isn't it? You talk about that, that closing down, the peripheral vision, the tunnel vision, all these things that we know are associated with these extremely high levels of fear and adrenaline. But in and behind that, it's a lot of that has to come back to the hours and hours and hours of training that you would have undertaken to find yourself in a situation such as that.
It's been interesting over the years looking at different training methods and the history of warfighting and things like that. But back in the day, they say that like the American Civil War, where they used to line up and point rifles at each other in a park and shoot at each other, saying the statistics show that I think it was around 70 or 80% of the guys couldn't fire at the person, or they would fire over their heads deliberately because they hadn't been trained to shoot a person. A lot of soldiers and things, the research is done where they can't fire or they freeze because they haven't trained for it. So our training at the time was, we did a lot of paper target shooting, but even the paper targets, you'd have a shape of or a picture of a guy pointing a gun at you, things like that. What's a threat? What's not a threat? So it related straight back to that paper target guy pointing a gun right at me. That's a shoot threat. As time evolved, we did a lot more paint round type training and things like that at the TRG. So you would have scenarios, and even the WA police and different police areas do a lot more paint training now, where it's more realistic. So you might have a threat, but he hasn't got the gun pointed at you, then it moves, and at what point do you fire? And so you train for the adrenaline, you train for the real thing. But you're exactly right. The training that we did at the time was definitely good enough to switch my brain straight into that's a threat, shoot or no shoot. This is a shoot threat. I've got to shoot to save my life. And when the pistol wasn't pointed at me, it was no longer a threat, so I stopped shooting, and that's where the training absolutely kicked in.
We opened the chat talking about your involvement as a young general duties copper in some of the investigations pertaining to the Claremont Serial Killer. Somewhat ironically, over 20 years after that, as you said, it was a 23-year investigation. You actually had gone full circle yourself with regards to that and had some involvement in the back end of that case.
Yeah, it came up at TRG. It was a fairly quiet thing when it first came in, this job, because it was so high profile, and we didn't want the detectives didn't want any leaks as to the fact that they'd found a suspect and things like that. So one of the biggest things towards the end of this case was that no evidence got destroyed by the main suspect, who was Bradley Edwards. How it came about was in the media and been publicised in court with the DNA technology improving, and eventually DNA got linked to his family bloodline and then linked directly to him. As the technology improved, they were able to actually work out who it was, which is brilliant. So first thing, a couple of detectives from where we were started getting transferred to this area, major crime area, basically to investigate this suspect, with a few days to go before we arrested him. Detectives started getting pulled from different areas, and the case went from steady 23-year investigation to full speed. Let's work out who this guy is, what's the evidence, make sure nothing goes wrong in court, and that he actually goes down for the crimes, which was good. So we got a heads up with a couple of days to go, but we didn't really get a lot of information. Then on the day, we came in early and got a briefing, and we did our plan and briefing for the job, which was basically to take out Bradley Edwards, ideally in his home, and in a way that we'd be able to maintain any evidence that he might have and not cause any problems with the case. We didn't want him to go down hard or anything. We didn't want any resistance because nothing he could use in court to say, oh, they made me admit to certain things because of the force that had to be used. So we had to work out how to do it pretty smoothly and keep all the evidence intact if there was any left after all those years. So things they were looking at was his involvement in the dark web and things. So they thought that if he could have got to his computer and destroyed things, then that would be an issue, plus whatever else he might have had in his house. And he also had a Telstra car, which I believe was a different Telstra car to what he had back in when the murders were happening. But interesting that he had that sort of car that could be used to gain confidence to get people on board. When they first looked at the case, obviously the taxi drivers got hammered because they thought it might have been someone like a taxi who could get girls on board easily, but Telstra makes sense as well. So we went out that morning and we sat off his house a fair way off in the bushland and just got surveillance teams to have a look at the house and watching for any movement basically, and there'd been no movement at the house, so we couldn't confirm whether he was in there or not. But also for, I guess, obvious reasons, commissioners and people high up in the police wanted this guy taken out as early as possible because to leave a known serial killer on the streets would be a bad thing. So we had to make a decision at some point. So ended up coming up with a plan where we got a surveillance covert guy to go and knock on the door of his house, and Bradley Edwards answered the front door, and the covert guy basically said, oh, I just saw some kids mucking around with your car out the front. You might want to check it out. Bradley Edwards said, yeah, thanks for the heads up, went out, checked his car doors and things, and went back inside the house. So within a couple of minutes from there, we got our team sorted and we rolled in. My role in that one was to break the front door open initially and then during the raid on the house, and we had teams going in the back door in different directions so that he couldn't get away and he'd be arrested in place rather than run around the house and do any damage or interfere with evidence. So I bashed through the front door. The front door went like a saloon door. The top half smashed open and the bottom half stayed, and it was an old wooden door, so it just swung around. So I ended up kind of dismantling it into little pieces of wood. We got through there pretty quickly and then grabbed him at gunpoint basically in the hallway just inside the front door. So by the time he was wondering what was going on and his door was going in, he was down on the ground on the carpet in the hallway and strapped up and face down into the carpet. So the other guys came in the back and everything was covered and all rooms were cleared. We did sheds and things like that and just made sure there was no one else around. And then once it was secure, we sat there. We did what we normally do with bad guys. If we do a house-type raid, is we'll get them down, face down. Quite often we find they're not very lippy with us, so they don't want to have a crack at us. But as soon as we leave and detectives or someone else walks in, they get brave again. But this guy it was probably, I've never seen this before, he had no criminal record, but he sat down on the carpet for probably 4 or 5 minutes while we stood over him with guns and just making sure he didn't get up to anything. And then he just stuck his head up and he said, oh, so what's this all about then? And just told him, mate, detectives will be here soon. Just keep it quiet. They'll talk to you when they get here. He said, fair enough. And he put his head back down on the carpet. So his pulse was probably like 40, 50 at that point for a guy who'd never been arrested, now been taken out by TRG. And I mean, I can assume things that it was 23 years of relief there or something for him, but I'll never know. It's just he was very calm and very peculiar in that way. His house was waist high with boxes, and he was a hoarder from the looks of it. So he had stuff everywhere, and that was for detectives to sort out. I think they went through the house for about 4 or 5 days after that, looking at everything. For me to be able to see that case from start to finish, and that was shortly before I left the police, was pretty awesome chapter to finish. But like I say, still sad for the families and one of the girls who's never been found in particular. But a chapter closed over my whole policing career for sure.
And I would imagine a fairly extensive custodial sentence just out at the end of all that.
Yeah, I'd be amazed if anyone was willing to give him parole ever, because you'd have to put your name to that one. So I don't think he'll be out. I think Heard some interesting stories from when he first went to prison. To be honest, his family were supporting him. So he'd been involved in community football teams and things like that. There's photos of him getting awards for being this football team member and whatever. People came out from the club afterwards and said, "Oh yeah, always thought he was a bit peculiar, but you'd be feeling a bit dirty with the knowledge that he was a serial killer." But he joined the community, but his family were all supportive and in the media saying that he hadn't done it. They've got the wrong guy. Right up until the point where when he went to court, he'd come up with a strategy, I believe, with his lawyer, but he basically pled guilty to a very serious sexual assault in the cemetery before one of the crimes, before the murders, which nearly killed the girl involved as well, the victim. So it was pretty horrific what he did to her. And then the family went very quiet after that. So they'd gone from, there's no way it could be this person, to, oh, Jesus, he pleaded guilty to that. It's they kept quiet from there. So, he, have no doubt he was a guy. I'm not a magistrate or anything. I'm not making the call, but the DNA evidence was all there and he pleaded guilty to these things. And, so I'm glad he's gone for good, I'd say.
I want to thank you so very much for joining us from the studio there over Western Australia. A 23-year career, 15 of those years in the tactical response group, and such a wonderful insight. And I've really, really enjoyed the chat, and thank you for dropping in and spending some time with us.
Thanks very much for having me.
Crime Insiders Detectives is a LiSTNR original production. It's hosted by me, Brent Sanders, produced by Ed Gooden, and sound designed and imaged by Link Kelly.